All right, so this is about birdscaping. And let's jump right into this. And of course, we are Wildlands of Greater Cleveland, and I am Ray Stewart. So let's move on and advance screen. There it is, first steps. All right, so the notion here is to landscape for birds, and this is a little bit different topic than we normally do when we talk about ecological landscaping, because we often hear about pollinators, butterflies and bees that we're planting for that. So producing nectar and pollen seems to be the focus of most of our topics when we think about native landscaping. So this is a little bit different take on that. So we get to cover some different plants in this, and different aspects of native landscapes. So if you're favoring birds, the first things you want to consider is whether or not you want to put out a feeder, and many people do. And there's different kinds of feeders. There's seed feeders, there's suet feeders, and the better variety of food you put out, the better variety of birds that you will get. The main caution that I'm told is that if you start feeding the birds in the winter, that you should feel obliged to continue to feed them in the winter. Some of our feathered friends may decide to stick around because they see that there is a food source for them, and if that disappears, they may be hard up and confused about what to do. So if you start feeding, keep feeding, and help these birds get through the winter if you have coaxed them into staying over winter and not moving further south. Another thing to keep in mind for the birds, especially like this week, if there's any way you can have liquid water, it will benefit the birds. So that either means you're putting fresh water out there regularly, or you have a bird bath with a heating element in it. That's something to consider in your landscape. And you also want to consider window collisions. So big problem with declining bird populations is that there are many hazards, and often these are man-made hazards. If there's any way that you can modify your windows to reduce collisions, and sometimes that means putting some decals in there, or putting some texture in it, or having blinds that are textured so that the reflection of the sky in your windows, especially the larger windows, do not fool birds that will fly in. A patio door is a good example, where if you have a big picture window, when they see the reflection of the sky in that window, they may be confused and not see that as a solid barrier and think they're flying into the open air. So look into ways that you can avoid those collisions. And one of my pet peeves is cats. I know there's lots of cat lovers out there, and many of my neighbors are cat lovers, and they let their cats wander out of the house day and night. And that is probably the biggest threat to our native bird populations, above all else, of the man-made risks that are out there, is domestic cats. So I would argue that it's not good for the cats, and it's not good for our bird populations either. I have tried to influence my city government to take up the issue and say, hey, please, let's treat cats like dogs and not let them wander free. Birds is one of the reasons, and what these cats leave behind in my garden is not welcome either. So for those reasons, please take these first steps for the birds. So often what we hear when we're planting native, the value of natives goes something like this. Quick outline: plants are consumed by herbivores, and the majority of that is insects. Insects are made up of really good food values, sugars, proteins, fats, and then that gets sent through the food web into amphibians, reptiles, birds, many insectivores out there that eat the things that eat our native plants, and that really drives the ecology. Um, so that's the pathway we normally see is the bugs. You want bugs to eat your native plants, put holes in the leaves sometimes. Rare that they take enough to do any damage, and then those caterpillars feed everything else. Some herbivores like deer will eat leaves and bypass that insect stage, but the biggest pathway of food through the environment is from native plants through insects to everything else. That's the story we normally hear, and then we encourage people to choose those native plants that will favor these insects, and we do well with that focus. But there are other pathways as well, and that's going to be more the focus of this birdscaping presentation. There are other foods out there as well. Seeds are important, so producing plants that have seeds also feeds the birds, and that could be a very important food source. By allowing your plants that once they flower and go to seed to leave those seeds out there. Now, many people that are traditional perennial plant growers are working hard at deadheading the plants to make them look nice, to make them look neat, make everything look tidy. But by removing those seed heads, you're also taking a lot of the food value of those plants out of circulation. So that's something to keep in mind. Nuts also, there are many trees that produce nuts. There's a wonderful woodpecker that is squirreling away nuts in little chinks in the bark here for later use. So nuts will help feed the birds, and certainly there's all kinds of fruit. Here's an example. This shows an American plum, a great source of food. And many of these food sources come later in the season. So we're looking at feeding the migrating birds in late summer and fall. This can be very important to help them on their way to parts south at that time of year. Many of them overwinter. Some of these fruits and nuts are persistent throughout the winter, so that those birds who do stay without migrating can take advantage of these food sources. So we're going to look at some examples of some of the choices that are out there that provide food at these without going through that pathway of insects to feed the birds. So American plum has been a mainstay of Native American populations. In fact, it is one of the plants that many Native Americans would plant and produce orchards, maybe even as a nomadic tribe. They would go from place to place, but they would revisit these places. So they would take seeds with them and plant them. And there were places that have been found here in northern Ohio where there are little orchards of American plum that must have been deliberately planted sometime before settlement. There's many streams and creeks named after plum. So there's Plum Creek, there's Plum Brook here, both of those in northern Ohio, named after the American plum that was found in abundance in these areas. So it was a cultivated plant hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. And it can still be used, although it is a bit tart, I'm told. So it's a medium-sized tree, beautiful spring flowers. If you're looking for a substitute for those calorie pears that you certainly don't want, you could do a lot worse than American plum. If you want a medium-sized street tree, especially in a place that has that's a little bit wet, you'll be favoring robins and bluebirds and cedar waxwings. They'll all be taking advantage of that fruit. And of course, in the spring, you got all those flowers too, so the normal pollinators will benefit as well. Flowering dogwood, very common tree in the woods, very easily accessed in traditional garden centers. You can a medium-sized tree. It has, of course, flowers, favors the pollinators, but it also produces these beautiful berries. So you get a secondary aesthetic feature with the berries later on in the season. Loves partial sun, so it's a good woodland edge kind of plant. Warblers and thrushes are attracted to those berries, as well as cardinals and grosbeaks. You're going to be feeding the birds very well. Every landscape that has a little bit of space should have a flowering dogwood. Please be aware that there's a lot of varieties out there that may not function the same. So a straight species, Cornus florida, would be my first choice. Eastern redbud is another great native tree I see growing all over the place. It's very common on roadsides and in woodlots. Similar locations where it's like partial shade is favored by this, but full sun is fine. The flowers come out before the leaves, so it's a great early spring burst of color. Even hummingbirds will come to the flowers, but then late in the season, it produces these the fruit, the seeds that look like little bitty string bean pods. They dry out, and those pods split, and many birds. I get some of the local neighborhood finches coming over and feasting on these when those seeds begin to dry out, and they're very easily reached by them. They can get them off of the plant or as they fall to the ground. And this is a legume, so Eastern redbud is in the bean family, and which means that it's got a special relationship in the soil, helps to capture nitrogen from the atmosphere and stick it in the soil, enriching it with nutrients, and helping to favor other landscape plants that you may have in that root zone. So it's a win-win in many ways. Coralberry, I'm hearing about this and seeing it more and more. Has a tremendous fuchsia colored berry. I don't think the flowers are all that notable, but later in the season, when the berries ripen, it will attract lots of birds, sparrows, warblers, birds of many kinds to those berries. If they don't get eaten right away, they will persist on the plant well into the winter. So it's a nice medium to small shrub that can easily be worked in. I would not plant just one, just cause. I'd say find room for 3 of these guys and let them go. And I don't think you'll regret it. Viburnum, a little bit larger shrub. The American cranberry bush viburnum is not a cranberry. It's not in the cranberry family. It's a viburnum family plant. Medium size shrub, 8 to 12 feet. That's getting, for some people, they say, well, that's getting to small tree size, isn't it? In my mind, the difference between a shrub and a tree is that a tree generally has one, maybe two or three stems or trunks. If it gets more than that, it's more likely to be called a shrub. So it's more, a shrub is more of a form than a species. And wonderful fruit. I've been hearing people making jam or jelly out of the fruit. So pretty tart, but edible. A lot better if you can blend it into some kind of a sugary concoction before you eat it. And of course, robins and cedar waxwings will love those berries too. Here's one that I think is most renowned for the color of its the stems in winter. So red osier dogwood, the red is the stem color. Much more effective in mass, so a shrub border if you can. It loves wet soil, so if you've got a stream bank or someplace that you want to stabilize the ditch, this would be a great one to put in for erosion control. But it also has flowers. It also has berries, but a tremendous winter effect to it. Winterberry holly. These come. It's very common in garden centers. This kind of holly. Many of the Winterberry hollies that you find in garden centers are named varieties rather than pure species. So they may say, look, get our Winterberry holly. It only grows 2 or 3 feet tall. It'll fit into your landscape so nice. Well, it's probably not the native species if that's the way it's being described. So look for Ilex verticillata and a pure species if you can handle that kind of height. Otherwise, you're going to be pruning it frequently. The flowers that you see in this picture here are not real showy. They come and go pretty quickly, but the berries are the real treat. Thus, its name Winterberry. If you look closely at the flowers in this one image, you see there's 5 petals, and in the center is this little green sphere. That tells you that this is a female plant, because that little green sphere is what will develop into the red berry later in the season. The male plants do not have that. So when you're shopping for these, check to see if it is a male or a female. You should have both. I usually like, when I planted around here, I planted, I think, 4 females and 1 male. I put the male back off in a corner and kept the females where they're more likely to be seen. Fragrant sumac. Most people hear the word sumac, they think poison sumac. That's not the one you want to plant. Poison sumac is pretty nasty stuff. Skin irritant. The other sumacs are not. So this fragrant sumac does have a fragrance to the leaf. It's a medium-sized to small shrub, very tough. will grow in poor soils, rocky areas, and forms a nice solid kind of a hedge. So if you're looking for something just as a solid foundation plant along, the side of your garage or something like that, this will fill in very nicely. You plant these things a few feet apart, and within a couple of years, it'll look like just one solid mass in an area. The leaf, if you see the three-part leaf on this, so it looks like, oh, leaves of three, let it be. People might mistake this for poison ivy if all they see is a three-part leaf. It's not. It's not poisonous at all. Of course, the berries are valuable. The fruit is valuable to birds. The other sumacs are also good ornamentals. I think smooth sumac, staghorn sumac are more, 10 to 15 feet tall, but they are also nice ornamental plants. So consider the Rus family, the sumac family in your landscaping searches. Elderberries, I think, if you haven't gone and collected elderberries in the wild and feasted on them when they're ripe, you've really missed out. They will stain your clothes, so be aware of that. But it's a nice, lovely flower, flat-topped white flower, followed by abundant clusters of dark blue berries. Birds will love them. They commonly grow in wetter areas, open woods. They do well with more sun, but some partial shade would be okay. And you'll favor the birds by doing that. Allegheny serviceberry, there's other kinds of amelanchers out there, but Allegheny serviceberry is very common, easy to find in most garden centers. Could be a substitute for Callery pear. Beautiful spring flowers. Tends to be more of a multi-stemmed shrub than a tree, but you might find a tree form limited. If the nurseryman prunes it to single or double trunks, you might find something like that available. A good street tree, I think. Spicebush, lovely understory tree or shrub, medium size. You crush the leaf, you get a nice, fragrant, spicy odor from that. Always fun to do when you come by one of those. The berries are loved by wildlife. Early to flower in the spring, so good for pollinators as well. And don't forget the nuts. American hazelnut is another understory woodland tree or shrub that grows edible nuts. Hard to find the nuts because the birds will usually get them first. But occasionally you can stumble upon one of these with a few ripe nuts on it, and you can just grab them and eat them right off the plant when they're mature, and get a little snack while you're hiking in the woods. And don't forget a vine once in a while. So, I always thought that vines were just a nuisance kind of plant, or that grapevines were a nuisance plants and they were escaped from vineyards. Well, that does happen, and there are a lot of invasive cultivated wine grapes that kind of get loose, but there are also a number of native grapes that are out there. So here, a frost grape is one of them. It'll scramble over trees and shrubs, so it'll climb up, and it can kind of shade out some of the plants a little bit. That can happen, but you're also getting these wonderful clusters of fruit that will feed the birds. And then this close-up I have, the lower of the pictures, is just to show the vine itself. that looks really gnarly and shredded. There are some birds that seek out grapevines so that they can grab these ribbons of grapevine bark to weave into their nests. So that is another thing to consider when favoring the birds is, are you providing nesting material for the birds? So there's certainly food, there's shelter that these plants can provide, but nesting material is also an important consideration, and a grapevine provides that and will help support certain birds that really like that, the long, strong threads of the bark from a grapevine. It's great for engineering a bird's nest, and may be essential to some of our birds and wildlife. And also grasses, if you're growing some of the native grasses, those are used in nests as well. So leaving these materials over winter can be very beneficial. So if you're not trimming your perennial garden down to the ground, if you're leaving the seed heads up, you're providing food for birds. If you're leaving grasses up, those blades of grass can be really important nesting materials for the birds when they return in the spring. And having a plant with a horizontal branch on it, you've just provided a perch, and you may get more birds in your yard just because they've got a place to hang out, or they've got a place to sit and look and check out the landscape before going to your bird bath. You know, they need to, they often, you know, want to stop and check things out before taking advantage of the other resources that you're providing. So don't forget about a nice little perch for our feathered friends. And that's my rundown.
Are you going to show us your wonderful display, Ray?
What's my wonderful display?
Oh, the one that you and Janice. I was about to say, I know you have something else.
Janice made something.
Do you need me to share?
Yeah, let's see.
Do me a favor, stop sharing, and then I'll display it. So one of the things we're going to start trying to do this year when we do topics like this is possibly, I can't promise you every time, to show you a sample of how you can maybe design your yard to incorporate some of these recommendations, and or for design purposes. So give us a few moments, and Ray, let me know once you've passed over control.
I stopped sharing.
Okay, so you'll have to click on Zoom 2 and change, oh, actually, I can reclaim it. Give me 1 second. All right. Give me 1 moment.
I'm just looking at some of the chat responses, and I really appreciate seeing comments that people have put in here, adding tremendously to. I was hoping this would happen, adding to the content from your own knowledge, background, and experience with native plants and birds. Thank you all for contributing.
Yes. So Ray, do you want to call out some of the elements you talked about within this design?
I need to see it here.
Can we print that?
We'll be actually sharing it both on our website and whatnot. So like I said, this is something we've recognized that there's not a lot of great resources for design options
Right.
to incorporate into the yard. So this is something we're gonna start trying to do. Like I said, I can't promise it every time, but we definitely teamed up to try to make this happen for you this time.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got like a 1-inch square in the middle of my screen with the design. I don't know why that is. Oh,
Is everyone else seeing
wait.
a full or is it small for everyone?
No, it's good.
Okay, just want to make sure it wasn't on my side.
Okay, and okay, yeah, now I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, so here's a plant list from the presentation. And yes, there's a water source in here. The green is like a lawn, and then like a backyard surrounded by uh, various plants, and so they're numbered. So number
Love
1
it.
up here in the corner shows flowering dogwood. Number 2 is down to the left. There's a threesome of hazelnuts. There's a long stretch here, number 3, of the fragrant sumac, as I was talking, like making a hedge. It'll fill in as if it was one. Number 4, a black chokeberry. I don't think that was one that I had on my list, but is an excellent addition for the birds. Number 5, eastern redbud. Here, there's 1, 2 on this side, and then a third one off to the other side. It's hard to have too many if you've got the space to put those in. And of course, many of these shade trees, if you've got shade plants or spring ephemerals, they can go in and around these plants too. So just because there's a tree with a canopy that is 10 feet wide doesn't mean that's the only thing that's going to be in that space. So think in 3 dimensions as you're considering your landscape. Maybe 4 dimensions, because then you can have spring flowering things followed by summer flowering things. So include time in your landscape dimensions as well. And then the wet to moist site down below,
Right,
there
that's what I'm
is,
interested in.
yeah, the Allegheny serviceberries here, a nice threesome. Unless it's a real spectacular plant, a specimen plant, 3 is always better than 1, in my humble opinion. We've also got a single here that is the grape. You may only want 1 grapevine, because it could get to be quite a big tangle if it's not well managed, but it could be trained up on a fence like it is along the back here. So grapevines are they can be whipped into submission, but it takes a yearly effort to make sure that is doing what you want it to do. Number 7, here's a little threesome over here of the Winterberry holly. These are labeled as being females. I don't know that there's a male in this design, but just a reminder, they do come as either males or females. And if you or your neighbors don't have it, there may be 1 male in the neighborhood that can service all of those females. So there needs to be 1 around somewhere. And then there are number 9, Coralberry here. I wouldn't have stopped with 1.
Never heard of Coralberry.
Yeah. Number 9. Yes. And then 10, we've got, oh, there's the male. I'm sorry, I missed that earlier. So 7 over here with the female winterberries, and then in the middle there's a male. And it looks like the viewing area would be down below. And then back by the fence, kind of tucked away, is the male. The number 11 being the red osier dogwood, a nice cluster of those. 12 coming up with a nice clump of spicebush. And here it also shows another blue dot with a water source in this one below. So getting some medium-sized woody plants, some small trees or medium-sized or to low shrubs is a nice way to fill space to get a native plant garden started, and then think about how to fill in with perennials and ground covers is a nice follow-up to that. Okay.
All right, thank you, Ray. So one thing I just want to add on to the conversation about the tree, what you put under some of the trees, but back in, I want to say it's October or November, we, Julian team, did a wonderful presentation for us on soft landings. So I highly recommend that you check out that's on our YouTube channel. Because it would be a great supplement to this if you're looking to do the next layer on how to support this type of ecosystem.